Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Hello and welcome to another episode of Palpulse Live. I am Faris Amir, and today I am pleased to be joined by the founder of News Cord, Nima Akram. Nima, how are you doing this evening?
Alaikum. Yeah, doing good. Just came back and ready to talk about the latest news, inshallah.
Brilliant. We'll be discussing a few things today. First of which is the Trump comments on the hostage exchange, how that's affected things. We'll be talking about Israel's continued violations of the terms of the ceasefire agreement, and we will go on to several headlines by the mainstream media exposing their biases, courtesy of Nima and his crew at News Cord. And we'll actually start with a clip from an interview I did earlier today with the world-renowned journalist David Hurst about the Israeli violations of the terms of the ceasefire agreement and how they view Palestinians. The Israelis have violated the terms of the ceasefire, according to Palestinian security services in Gaza, a total of 266 times, killing 132 Palestinians, one of which actually was killed this morning, 3 others wounded. My question is, what is behind these violations of the ceasefire agreement? Is it that simply the Israelis want to go back to war, Netanyahu wants to go back to war, or is there something deeper within the Israeli psyche which views Palestinians as, as playthings that can be pushed around?
Both. Netanyahu is doing everything he can to provoke Hamas, and Hamas are not taking the bait up. But Netanyahu is also calculating that the violations of the ceasefire will not be enough to provoke a Hamas response. Therefore, the ceasefire is continuing. What's happening on stage 2, I've got no idea. I'm very gloomy about stage 2 because stage 3 has already been ruled out by the Trump plan. And the whole idea of a hostage exchange and then an end to war, which was what Hamas's position was all the time, is being constantly undermined by Israel. Israel's got too many levers in its power to use to be forced to ceasefire. The only authority that could do that would be Trump himself. And Trump, I don't think, will do that. Trump will just get as many hostages out as he can and then say, job done. As far as the psychological aspect is concerned, the sort of levels of racism and Islamophobia and hatred towards the Palestinians has now reached a point at which it is unsafe to talk Arabic anywhere in 48 Israel publicly. You've got people going around with guns. You saw what happened in Miami when 2 Israelis were mistaken for Palestinians and shot dead by and that is the atmosphere also in Israel. So in terms of looking around to your fellow brothers and saying we've got to share this land together, we have never been further apart in terms of mass psychology. It is us or them. We've got this land, they've got to go. And the mistake in the past was not to finish a job that Ben Gurion started. And that is what the vast majority of people are saying. No one is saying you are sowing the seeds for another 75 years of conflict. And so the conflict is getting to its lowest and worst point. And I don't think we've seen the worst point yet I think it will continue and continue until Israel realizes collectively it can't go on. But that realization is days, months, years, decades off at the moment. We're deep into a situation, and you're quite right in one of your previous questions when you said the dangers of applying ethnic cleansing to Palestinians could also be applied to Jews. The model of forcing people to leave against their will could be applied to them if and when the tables are turned. So I think we've got a regional structure in which Israel is basically going from one ethnic cleansing program to another. It's no longer about Hamas. It's no longer about Gaza. This is an attempt to fundamentally alter the demographics of the population from the river to the sea. And it has to be stopped. And only after it's stopped can you then start saying, well, once they've realized that this is impossible, then possibly you could get the conditions for, and once the occupation gets as expensive as possible to Israel, that is when proper talks can go on about sharing the land together.
So I think I've been on mute this whole time. So that was a clip from an interview I did with David Hurst, the editor-in-chief of Middle East Eye and world-renowned journalist. It will be out soon after we finish this live stream for all to see. He didn't seem to have a particularly optimistic view of the current situation of the future. But I wonder, Nima, what are your thoughts on his answer?
Yeah, so I think definitely, like I would say, more or less agree. Obviously, highly respected guest you had there in David Hurst. I think, look, like, obviously it's hard to be optimistic in this situation. Like Israel over the past 15 months has battered Gaza in genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza, and now it's crazy to see the playbook play out in real time in our lifetime, at least, where they go from genocide directly to then very complete ethnic cleansing. Obviously ethnic cleansing has been going on in Palestine at the hands of the Israelis for over 75 years, but this is kind of now saying, okay, the entire strip needs to be emptied out. And the way, obviously, Trump, he's always been, someone that says it how it is. So it's not like, I'm definitely not one to say that, Biden would have done it differently. It just would have probably been more subtle. So I think realistically, this is like US policy, it seems. And obviously, there's people that are saying, that look like King Abdullah and Sisi are very opposed to it. But obviously we saw how King Abdullah acted in front of Trump when he was actually there in person. And it's very clear that he's under a lot of pressure. Obviously, Jordan is heavily supported by America. So you can kind of see how this is all done by design. It's kind of like your classic divide and conquer strategy where you've pinned the Arab states against each other. To the point where they're weak and they cannot kind of act as they'd like because they're scared of the US pulling their support. So yeah, it's hard to be optimistic.
I mean, you said it there. That was essentially a snippet of American kind of imperialism. The American policy towards Palestine is Jewish supremacy and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. In 2023, very soon after the genocide started, Anthony Blinken, at the time Secretary of State, toured the Arab countries, attempting to get them to accept the expulsion of Palestinians. And it did not work at the time then, because I think they understood the threat to the global world order that would pose, the threat to American hegemony that would pose should the Palestinians be expelled into Egypt or Jordan, etc. It would cause massive instability in the region. I want us to move on swiftly to kind of the bulk of our live stream today. Nima has kindly offered to go through essentially the mainstream media's manufacturing of consent for the ethnic cleansing and dehumanization of Palestinians through his work and the work of his team in News Corps. I'll just hand you the floor, Nima.
Yeah, so I think it's thank you, Fadis. I think it's probably worth me like introducing News Code, and first of all, like based on what the viewers think, like I'd love to be like a regular feature on this show. Of course, Fadis, if you'd have me, it's always a pleasure to talk with you about these important topics. And yeah, to talk about like kind of the past year of what I've been working on at News Code. Essentially what News Corps is a news platform which is dedicated to giving everyone transparency in news, to finally kind of take back the narrative, using sort of modern technology such as artificial intelligence to be able to kind of scour the news in real time, at a massive scale, and be able to compare them against each other and show what the missing information is, what the contradictions are, the differences in tone of language, like the very subtle things that go over so many people's heads, the varying techniques that the mainstream uses to kind of push its agenda and further its agenda. Of course, in the case of Palestine, this is a key weapon that Israel is using to normalize what they're doing, to sanitize genocide. Western media is wholly complicit in this. They have been consumed by billions worldwide, and the way they've reported on the genocide has essentially like enabled Israel to continue with impunity. So my work at News Squad is basically kind of keep up to date with the news, do these side-by-side comparisons of, for example, how the Western media covers it versus the Middle Eastern sources and more local outlets, and then also to like kind of turn this into an app which is free to use for everyone. It's on iOS and Android, and is essentially like a new way to consume the news, to give everyone the edge. So yeah, that's like an introduction of News Code. I don't know, Fadis, would you like me to like kind of talk about this kind of the biggest stories coming out of the past week?
Yeah, go ahead.
Cool. Okay, let me share my screen. Hopefully this works. No. Cool. Okay. So I think obviously just based on the interview that you just kind of showed with David Hurst talking about Trump's kind of ethnic cleansing rhetoric and what he's been saying recently. We kind of this is a post where we dissect the way the media has actually been covering this, and how they're trying to normalize it so quickly as well. So obviously, like for people that are close to and have been watching in horror for the past year, they obviously would have seen this and been disgusted by it and sickened by it. But you can see how Western media starts to manipulate this instantly, so that the people that are potentially more withdrawn from the genocide and what's been going on in Palestine kind of see this as maybe not as bad as what it really is. So you can see here the Associated Press, their headline is Trump won't rule out deploying US troops to support rebuilding Gaza. So this is like, and they're not even directly quoting Trump. Like this is just the AP framing of what Trump has been saying. So instead of there's so many ways you can cover this. You can say ethnic cleansing, which no Western media headline has said. They do mention it in some articles, as you read below the fold, but no headline has mentioned it. Instead, you can see this is just like 4 snippets of kind of maybe some of the worst headlines that we picked up on News Squad. Is they're trying to focus on the positives of what Trump has said: support rebuilding, Sky News, jobs and housing, level it for jobs and housing instead of leveling it so that Palestinians don't have a home anymore. And you've got Time as well there, which is level it and build resorts, like just kind of picking, like cherry picking what Trump was saying basically. And I actually put a headline from Jewish Insider there. Obviously, they're not a mainstream outlet. They're very much a pro-Israeli outlet. But I just wanted to I think it's interesting to see how aligned the mainstream is with such pro-Israeli outlets. And, this is to kind of even adding more headlines, really like bringing that point home around, none of these headlines actually talk about the Palestinians affected in this ethnic cleansing plan. So you can see how this is very much like these headlines are very much reminiscent of the initial kind of Balfour Declaration, where the Britain declared the state of Israel, where there was not one thought for the people that are indigenous to that land. And these headlines are very much the same. It's like, we've made no progress in terms of the way Western media is portraying it. It's kind of very much the perspective of the Israelis or the perspective of the Americans, and what they desire. Can you believe that these major outlets billions consume these? They're not even like what you'd call classically right-wing outlets, such as, like, I've intentionally not included the likes of Fox News or Daily Mail here. These are meant to be like center-leaning or whatever. None of them mention Palestine in the headline. I don't know. Should I pause here, Faraz, maybe for you to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I have a question in terms of what these headlines or these stories include. I mean, the Trump presidency and Netanyahu are now claiming that Gaza is uninhabitable, and they're essentially admitting that Israel committed genocide, that they brought about conditions to destroy, in whole or in part, a group of people, the Palestinians. So, is there any comment about what it means for them to admit that they destroyed Gaza?
No, because I think Western media is not reporting it like that. They're not, they're like kind of shielding Israel and America from this. Like, there's not one outlet here that has said, as a result of Israel's destruction of Gaza, it's kind of as a result of the Gaza war or as a result of the conflict. Like, it will never say it like that, word by word, even though Trump, and for better or for worse, Trump has always been one to be quite direct with what he says. He has said it himself, right? Even though I would argue that he hasn't necessarily said those words word for word, saying Israel has destroyed Gaza. He's kind of said it's become a mess. It's you can't live there anymore. So I think it's the classic, even though we witnessed it on our screens for 15, 16 months, there is still that lack of acknowledgement that Israel caused this.
Conrad in the chat just said, it seems to me those publications are all to serve up empire, just to cater to people of different dispositions, so they give different, in quotation mark, different takes, but the empire is served either way. I think this is an apt description of the mainstream media landscape. At the end of the day, even though there are differences in some editorial lines, largely the mainstream media has held water for the Zionist genocide of Gaza, the Zionist genocide of the Palestinians, and that is, as Conrad says, it's because it serves the empire. We need to always contextualize what's going on. The reason that the Americans allowed or did not stop the Israelis is not because Biden didn't have the power to stop them. It's not because Biden was crying at night looking at photos and videos of Palestinian children with their arms and their heads blown off, and he was sobbing and trying to figure out what he could do, but he had his hand tied behind his back. No, it's because the genocide of the Palestinians serves the American empire. And as Conrad said, and as Nima alluded to, all of these mainstream media outlets uphold the interests of the powerful, in this instance, the American empire. I wonder if you have any comments on that, Nima.
No, I think that wraps it up perfectly. Like, I completely agree with Conrad and yourself, Faris. Definitely. Should we move on perhaps to another headline from the past
sounds
week?
good.
Okay, perfect. So I think this one obviously, Dr. Abu Safia is he is still being detained in an Israeli prison without charge, and there's actually been it's progressing in a negative way for him, in terms of Israel has now, and I don't want to get the terminology wrong here, but they have now detained him under the unlawful combatants law. Apologies if you can't read this yet. Maybe I should have made the background a bit darker. But essentially what this means is he is now, according to Israeli law, they are now allowed to hold him indefinitely without charge or trial. Obviously, this is the case with thousands of Palestinians detained and held hostage in Israeli prisons. And now it seems like, a true hero of Gaza, who dedicated the past year to treating, and saving the lives of countless Palestinians who had lost limbs and been injured as a result of Israel's bombardment of the region. He has now himself been essentially kidnapped without trial. There was a development this week where basically he had his lawyer was able to speak to him for the first time, and his lawyer kind of documented that there was, he had been subjected to severe abuse, beatings with batons, electric shocks, repeated blows to the chest. And he was made to sit on sharp gravel. So, this is a torture, basically. He was tortured. And now I believe he is held not in the notorious Stetayman military camp, but in another one, I think in the West Bank. I forget the name. The kind of the new school take on this, in terms of, like, what we always try to do is kind of show the way that the mainstream is covering it versus other kind of types of news outlets. The case in this case, actually, like, the Western mainstream just did not talk about it at all. It's completely been omitted. To think that, for most of us who are locked in on the genocide and following the events of Gaza very closely and Palestine, he is an icon, he is a hero. He should be plastered across headlines around the world, not just local headlines, but CNN, BBC. To think if the script was flipped, if this was an Israeli doctor who had been kidnapped and was tortured, this would undoubtedly be plastered across headlines. But for a hero like this to just be completely ignored, this is misinformation via omission, where you leave out these humanizing stories. Like, the story of Dr. Abu Safia is such a human story, such an emotional story. How he's dedicated his life to treating those in Gaza, and especially the past year during a genocide, and how he was, even this picture which was in the background, how he was steadfast and walked towards the Israeli tanks. This is kind of the last picture seen of him in the Gaza Strip. this, they could have really, if they cared about the humans and actually delivering the news, this would be something that they would maximize and talk about. But unfortunately, this has been completely ignored. I'll leave it there. Maybe Faris, if you have any questions about Dr. Abu Safia.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite harrowing, really. And it's such an easy story for the Western media to latch on without necessarily, bringing to light much of the Israeli atrocities.
Hmm.
And it just you really do wonder why they're not talking about it. What's so important, or what are they trying to hide?
Yeah, and I think to your point, this is part of the unbalanced coverage which creates the narrative. Like if you talk about, for example, if you remember several weeks ago, one of the Israeli hostages that was released from Gaza, he had what the whole of the mainstream covered very prominently, a kind of gaunt appearance where he looked skinnier. And this became wow, look at how these hostages might have been treated in Gaza. Can you imagine the horrors? This became front and center. When did they talk about this for the Palestinian hostages that were released from the Israeli prisons over the past few weeks as well, where so many of them looked like a shadow of their former selves? They had, looked like they were traumatized. This was, and even which we might get onto if we have time, the four Palestinian hostages that were released this week, four of them were in critical condition. Actually, they needed immediate treatment. This was also completely ignored, and actually, this is kind of an exclusive, but we, with Unmute Humanity, who's like a partner organization, we started a complaint campaign against the BBC for completely omitting this whilst prominently covering the appearance of an Israeli hostage. And their response was, no, actually, we have. And what's funny is in the response email, they stick to the same wording where they say, no, we have also, as well as covering Israeli hostages, we have also covered Israeli prisoners, Palestinian prisoners. So they still maintain that as like they have to stick to this script. And they say we did talk about their appearance in, on this article, and they link the article, but it's in a footnote essentially. It's at the bottom. It's not the headline. It's not the main, it's not a dedicated article around the treatment of these Palestinian hostages. So you can see even in their response, it's almost like, yeah, we did talk about it, we ticked the box. And it's at this point where you have to realize that, and for those that see our Instagram content, we do host and run campaigns against Western media. And sometimes it does work and they do modify headlines. But most of the time, you realize actually Western media is a well-oiled machine. They know how to, stay on the edges of what's acceptable and what isn't, stay on the edges of what you can actually is illegal and what is legal. They have teams of lawyers helping them. We want to push this agenda, but how can we keep it so that actually we're not breaking any laws, or we can't get charged for defamation? They know what they're doing essentially. So this was evidence. The BBC knows what they're doing. They're telling us, they're responding to us saying, yeah, we did cover it. But inherently, they're admitting that, yeah, we covered it just as a footnote. That's not as, the Palestinian hostages are not as important as Israeli hostages in our eyes.
Yeah, I mean, it really makes you feel like this entire thing is a facade. Their supposed care for humanity and human life and human dignity is a mirage, an image they try to maintain in order for them to maintain their interests at large. And in terms of the BBC specifically, you mentioned the fact they call the Israeli captives hostages and the Palestinian captives prisoners. And every single time I read one of those BBC articles which announce the next captives to be released, it's always written by the exact same person, the person who was called out, exposed by Owen Jones, and I think it was for Drop Site News, as someone who was approached by the Mossad to write some propaganda for them, Rafi Berg. And he always seems to be I wonder why that's the case. I wonder why Rafi Berg is the individual who's always writing these particular articles, and why he's so obsessed with making a distinction between Palestinian captives and Israeli captives. Palestinians, as is well known, are very often put under administrative detention, which is when a Palestinian is basically abducted, usually from their homes at midnight, woken up, their families are terrified, they get abducted, and then they get put in prison without a charge, without trial, for an indefinite amount of time, and no one really knows what's going to happen to them. But apparently they are prisoners, and they deserve to basically be in Israeli dungeons. And this goes back to manufacturing consent. This goes back to the fear that the establishment has of the masses, right? If the establishment were not afraid of the reaction of the masses from hearing the truth, they wouldn't go to these lengths to obfuscate the truth. If the establishment thought that the masses, the people, would stay silent and would allow for a genocide to continue in their name, they wouldn't try to justify the actions of the Zionists. So this really goes to show not only how much power that we have as the people, but also how scared the establishment is of us realizing what kind of power we have. So that's something that we should always kind of keep in the back of our minds when we see this propaganda, when we see these lies, these half-truths, these attempts to hide the truth by the mainstream media. It's because of our inherent power. At least that's what I believe. I know there are many more headlines for us to go through, Nima. What's our next one?
Yeah, and really well said there, Faris. Like, there's definitely a reason why they have to hide it, and this essentially is to tame the crowd, right? So yeah, we kind of inherently talked about the Israeli the Israel releasing Palestinian hostages in critical condition. Maybe we'll briefly look at maybe go into a bit more detail here. Obviously, this was a horrific part of this where Israel forced the Palestinian hostages that were freed to wear shirts with a Star of David saying "We will not forget or forgive." And this is kind of a humiliation tactic that they used. And they also warned the freed Palestinian hostages to not express gratitude to Gaza or speak about their torture in Israeli prisons. So this is very damning. Like this is horrific, really, that they are so openly doing this. And realistically, I think Israel is now in the position where they feel so shielded that they can do certain things and get away with so much because they know that Western media will effectively kind of soften everything they do and allow them to get away with it. Because indeed, in this case, this particular angle of this story of these Palestinians being released, it was not covered at all by Western media. No one covered the fact that Israel forced these Palestinians to wear these shirts. So you can imagine, this is like, how can you not cover this? How is this not relevant? It's such an important part of it really shows you how these Palestinians are treated by Israel. And I think this kind of leads on to an important point, actually, which I think is worth covering, which is that actually, for a while over the past week, it looked like the ceasefire was very much on the edge of being over, because essentially in response to Israel's countless ceasefire violations, where they have killed actually over 100 people in Gaza since the beginning of the quote-unquote ceasefire. Hamas, and also as well as that, actually, there have been multiple commitments to the ceasefire that they are just not upholding. They have not delivered enough, facilitated or allowed enough aid to be delivered, enough mobile homes to be delivered. Like, in terms of the criteria for the ceasefire, as per what both sides agreed on, Israel has not met so many of the criteria. As a result of this, Hamas, in, I guess, a political move that we actually kind of see worked in many ways, said that we're not releasing the next batch until Israel upholds the conditions of the ceasefire. And then, indeed, Israel said that they would commit to this in a reversal of kind of what they had been doing. We've yet to see how that actually plays out, but in any case, Hamas said, okay, we'll release the 3 Israeli hostages as scheduled on Saturday. But none of these headlines from Western media explain what really happened. And even when Hamas initially said we will no longer release these hostages, that the Western media never went into more detail than that. They simply reported it as is. They applied no investigative journalism. And since when is journalism just that, where you just quote what one person says in a way that suits your agenda, but you do not apply any critique or any critical thinking to try to convey the full story to the masses. And yeah, so this slide kind of just shows you these headlines, none of them talking about why there exactly is a fragile ceasefire. None of them talk about the condition of the Palestinians that were released by Israel. Sky News does acknowledge that the four Palestinian hostages, they've said prisoners, of course, that were released, 4 of them were taken straight to the hospital. But they did only talk about this in a footnote of their live feed, and their headline at that moment in time said critical condition in scare quotes. Not sure why critical condition needs to be in scare quotes. Their condition was there for everyone to see. I'm not sure why that's needed, if not to downplay. And yeah, this is specifically about the Star of David and what the Israelis forced Palestinian hostages to wear. Again, no Western mainstream media was talking about it. It says here one source, I think is, if I remember correctly, RFI English talked about this. And by the way, this is a screenshot from our app where it kind of tells you where the sources come from that are talking about this story. But yeah, I think in a nutshell, that covers this kind of angle as well of what happened last week.
I want to just focus in on that story about the Palestinian prisoners being forced to wear Stars of David in order to humiliate them. What kind of cult do you have to be in order for you to not see how bad of a look this is? Let's say you see yourself as completely justified in humiliating Palestinians. Let's say Palestinians are the most evil people in the world, and no one really understands that except you, because you live right next to them and you experience all of the terror, the scary terrorist Palestinians.
Mm.
Do you not see how bad you look to the world? You've gone in, you've destroyed the Gaza Strip, especially the north. You have killed over 60,000 people, most of whom are women and children. And now, or not just now, but multiple points throughout the genocide, you essentially associate all of the crimes that you've committed with the Star of David. So not only have you destroyed your own credibility and your own reputation, but now you've made the world a much more unsafe place for Jews worldwide. because now the Star of David, which is associated with Judaism, not just Zionism, is associated with genocide, because you can't help yourselves but to either draw Stars of David on the rubble of the houses that you demolish, or to draw them on the bodies of Palestinians, or to force Palestinians to wear these symbols. And this goes back to the necessary or the necessity of anti-Semitism for Zionism. Zionism cannot justify itself unless anti-Semitism is a prominent kind of feeling, or if it's prominent in the world. And so my theory, and if I was a betting man, I would say that the Zionists intend, or some of them at least, intend to foment hatred towards the Jewish people so that they can justify the existence of this colonial, apartheid, genocidal settler entity in Palestine. ED asked a question actually to you, Nima. What can we do to fight back this bias? So to fight back against this bias, I'm guessing, is what he means.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. This is something we're very focused on right now, because obviously, like, a large part of what we do is expose the complicity in genocide and what Western media's tactics are. Obviously, the natural next step is, okay, how can we take action? How can we try to change this? So this is why we've partnered up with our very close partners now, Accountable Media, and they've got a really interesting product where they facilitate an easy way to complain to these media outlets. Right now, it's very much a black box. You have to go on, for example, for the BBC, you have to go on the BBC website. You have to put in your address in the complaints section, which is obviously hidden in the footer, and you have to, write all the evidence, and it's a very lengthy process. And this is on by design, of course. What Accountable Media has done is they kind of manually look at, for example, some of the cases which we bring up, and some of the problems or the misleading coverage that our app surfaces, and they write up a complaint. But then they use artificial intelligence to basically slightly rephrase this complaint, so that whenever someone hits send on their website, it slightly rephrases it so that each complaint looks unique. So this kind of multiplies the pressure on these outlets. So what we do with Accountable Media is they host complaints about some of the most egregious coverage from the Western mainstream, and literally with a click of a button, you put your email and you can send the template. And obviously you can read the template. If you obviously don't agree with it, you can rephrase it yourself as well. But the point is, Accountable Media's what makes them really special is they rephrase every single complaint. So this is like having an exponential effect on how much pressure you put them under. Obviously, this is just one step that you can take to fight against the bias, is to show them, look, we can see what you're doing. We're here. And obviously, you have to expect that majority of the time they will ignore it. But this pressure cannot be underestimated. If they can start to see, wow, the inbox is starting to fill up, more and more people are seeing. This is the reason why they are giving you such misleading coverage, is because they don't want you to see the truth. So if you're telling them, look, what you're doing is not working, we can see the truth, and we're complaining to you for not showing us the truth, this is bound to have a positive impact. And yeah, this is Faris. Thank you for bringing it up. This is Accountable Media, where all of you can go on it and complain now.
It's a brilliant initiative, as well as the News Cord initiative. It's important for us to do our part. I mean, we have to remember that this is a global struggle, and everyone has a part to play, no matter how small. And this is one of the small ways in which we can help to relieve the Palestinian people, especially those in Gaza. Danado says this is exactly one of the things we needed. I mean, yeah, absolutely. And I hope we can, or the viewers will check News Cord and Accountable Media out so that they are well informed and able to act upon the information that they have. I don't know if you have any headlines for the West Bank, but I do want to quickly look over an infographic I saw today by Al Jazeera. So this is an infographic about the crimes that the Israeli occupation has committed specifically in the West Bank. We've focused a lot on Gaza over the last 15 months, and that's because a literal genocide was being live streamed with hundreds of people dying every day. However, that has meant that we have kind of, I don't want to say forgotten, but we haven't really focused enough on what is going on in the West Bank and what continues to go on in the West Bank today. And actually, just quickly, today I read that the Israeli occupation violated the terms of the ceasefire agreement 266 times since the 19th of January, when the ceasefire came into action, and they killed 132 Palestinians, one of which was killed this morning, a woman, along with 3 other wounded. Nevertheless, this infographic shows us that at least 870 people have been killed by the Israeli occupation forces and settlers. So it's not just the army, but it's also the emboldened settlers who feel that they have a divine right to Palestinian land. And that also includes 177 children. At least 6,700 people have been injured. 6,729 people have been displaced. Over 13,572 people have been arrested. 13,000. And at least 2,168 structures have been demolished. Many of those structures are obviously homes. And we saw footage from areas like Tulkarem and Jenin, in which the Israeli occupation actually bombed neighborhoods with air power, with air fire, and they flattened essentially entire neighborhoods, making places like Jenin look like a mini Gaza. And this is still ongoing with the help of the Palestinian Authority. I know maybe you guys are a bit bored of how often I mention the Palestinian Authority, but honestly, the Palestinian Authority is partly to blame for this. They point their weapons at the Palestinian people, and when the Israeli occupation forces force their way into Area A, which is supposed to be fully under Palestinian Authority control, the Palestinian Authority Security Service flees. And there's actual videos of that. I think we'll probably have one ready for you next stream. But it is important for us to continue remembering that this is not over, even though there is a ceasefire. The Israeli occupation continues to violate the ceasefire in Gaza, as well as killing Palestinians, destroying Palestinian homes, and expelling Palestinians in the West Bank. I wonder if you have anything to add on the West Bank, Nima.
Yeah, I think you covered that really well. Obviously, what's going on in Tulkarem in Jenin is horrific. I think for the Tulkarem refugee camp, now Israel has been destroying it for 21 days. And yeah, I don't know if you can see this is the News Squad app. You can see over here, and obviously it's flipped the writing, so it'll be hard to read. But These two are about the West Bank, and it says mainstream blind spot. So essentially, for these two stories about Israel expanding settlements in the West Bank and Tulkarm refugee camp, no mainstream outlet is talking about this right now. I think we've lost Fadders, by the way, so I'll try to kill time before he comes back.
No, I'm here. I'm
Maybe.
here.
Oh, you're here. Okay, all right. Sorry, apologies. Yeah, but yeah, that's kind of all I have to say. Like, basically, none of the mainstream is talking about this. Then they're not talking about the West Bank and what Israel is doing there.
Yeah, Dana or Dana, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, saying Free Palestine TV has daily reports from the West Bank, so that might be a good resource to those who are interested. Good Shepherd Collective, also a valuable resource for continued coverage of the West Bank occupation. 90% of Jenin displaced. Doctors Against Genocide also have had live reports from inside. I mean, there are definitely resources for us to use. Unfortunately, they don't exist within the mainstream, and so we need to go out of our way to find them. It is currently 53 past. I think I'm okay with ending this stream here. I'm not sure if you have anything else to add, Nima, before we head out.
No, I think we can close it there. It was a pleasure.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Nima, for joining us today. Thank you for your insights and for your incredible work. And I hope that we can do this again very soon. I apologize for my seemingly lack of preparedness for this particular episode. I've had a very, very hectic day, but I will be more prepared for our next session. Thank you to all of our viewers who joined us. Thank you to all those who commented. Thank you, Conrad, Edie. Thank you, Kirk, Christina, Dana Doe, Jurian. Thank you, and I hope you have a good rest of your day or a good night if that is the time where you are. And I will see you next time. Take care.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.